So Lafayette's pedigree. Pedigree is that genealogy chart, that big algorithm. It's the sum of pedicured chromosomes. That's my term for epigenetics. Courage toned up on many a battlefield by his forebears and then passed on. Lafayette's pedigree has a hairpin loop, like a switchback at Angel's Landing at Zion National Park. The House of Lafayette, interestingly, designates a family tree. The term house, as it refers to family genealogy, is lifted from the Vulgate. You remember the Vulgate is the Latin translation of the Bible by St. Jerome. And St. Jerome uses the term house of David and house of Saul. It's a metaphor for a family tree. So the House of Lafayette begins in the year 1000 or thereabouts with Pons Mortier de Lafayette, about whom we know little. But Pons Mortier started the cascade. He was from Auvergne, and he perhaps was called upon for the First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. In the 13th century, that would be the 1200s, you remember you take the nth century, subtract 1 to give you the numeric correlate. In the 13th century, the House of Lafayette split. From the main branch came a cadet branch. The Lafayettes were the main branch. The cadet branch was Champetier. And there's a representative at the head of each of this food chain. For the Lafayette branch, Gilbert Motier, Seigneur de Lafayette. We'll talk more about that title. Dates around 1284. For the minor cadet break-off branch, Pons Mortier, Seigneur de Champetier. Our Lafayette is in this minor cadet branch. Lafayette, after the French Revolution, would bristle when he was called Marquis. He disdained hereditary titles. He preferred to be called General, a title he said he earned. It's about what you do, he said, not about to whom you are born. But his titles, too, have a long pedigree. All the titles in France dropped August the 4th, 1789, when the National Assembly proposed doing away with them, which Lafayette supported. But those titles have a distant pedigree. Seigneur, S-E-I-G-N-E-U-R, was the title given to the person who owned a seigneurie. You're correct. That is a tautology. It is like saying men are men. But in this case, more complicated. Dissect seigneur, S-E-I-G-N-E-U-R, and you find inside the whole anatomy of feudalism. Here's the thumbnail. Men, since the Roman times, have been rewarded for their service with grants of land. During the Middle Ages, this arrangement took on a new and formidable dimension, and nowhere more so than in France. France perfected this process. Let's take a brisk walk through history, just to review, just to set the stage. Begin for our purpose with the Greeks, then the Romans, and then, closer to home, the Gauls. From 500 BC to 500 AD, before the Common Era and then the Common Era, that defines antiquity, more or less. Gaul is a Celtic word meaning power or courage. One of the most powerful tribes was the Auvergne, for whom the province of Auvergne was named, south-central France, 300 miles south of Paris. And this is where Lafayette was born. One of its most powerful leaders of the Gauls was Vercingetorix. The Gallic Wars, 58 BC to 50 BC, described by Caesar in his commentaries, was the beginning of the end for Gallic hegemony. Good word, mark it. Franks followed, and this moves us close to the Middle Ages, 500 to 1500. These were Germanic people. Frank, the term, perhaps from the German frech, you have to roll the R's. My mother, who was German and here for 50 years, still had a thick accent the whole time and used to say, don't be frech. don't be mean. Not that she ever felt called upon to direct that toward me, of course. King Merovic began the Merovingian dynasty in about the 400s, the very first king of the Franks. Long, unruly hair distinguished them. They conquered the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, and Clovis I united all these disparate tribes, these Frankish tribes. Therefore, he's often considered the first king of the French because he consolidated his power through relationships. The feudal system began with Clovis in earnest. This system had three elements: personal, property, and politics. The term feudal was popularized by none other than Montesquieu in his Spirit of the Law, 1748. J.R. Strayer, a medieval scholar, said feudalism was public power in private hands. And Norman Cantor, professor of history at New York University, wrote a wonderful, accessible book I recommend to you, The Civilization of the Middle Ages. He said feudalism was a political system, an economic system, and a system of values. The personal part had to do with relationships of lords. Terminology becomes confusing. There were overlords, underlords, vassals, nobles. But an underlord or a vassal could become an overlord. That underlord would receive property, parse it out to others, and now he's moved from a vassal to a noble, an overlord. So the personal part had to do with relationships of lords. In France, lords were called seigneur, S-E-I-G-N-E-U-R. And vassals were the underlords. And vassal is a Celtic word meaning the boys, peasants. So the vassals protected the seigneur. They were bouncers. They lived out in the barn, out in stockade, at the seigneur's beck and call. They were given food and board, but this was haphazard loyalty. To consolidate fealty, Clovis rewarded his vassals with land. The vassal held the land in fealty, or in fee, F-E-E. The land was a fief, F-I-E-F, from the Frankish word fehu for cattle. The nobles, previously vassals, and now they've upgraded, they could rent out land to peasants. Some of the nobles weren't even on the land. They were absentee landlords. So a reward for service early on from the monarch to the vassals was called a beneficium. A beneficium could be a pension, but it could also be land. Precarium was a particular type of gift. Precarium was a gift of land, but with conditions. For instance, if you died, you gave the land back. Hence the term precarious. Allodial title was ownership free, clear, and forever. And this was rare. This was the monarchy or the church, a few other people. More common was fee simple title. Taxes, eminent domain, those conditions could apply to the gift.